So good morning. This is Wednesday, February 19th. It's 11:30, and this is the Athens City Planning Commission meeting. I look to my left and right, and I see that we have a quorum. We are one member down today, though. The mayor is unable to join us, and so four of us are here, and in fact, like I say, we do have a quorum. I would like to ask that anybody who would plan to speak or think they might speak, if they would raise their right hand and basically say "I do" after. What I'm doing is that I ask that whoever does speak today at this commission, that they tell the truth to the best of their knowledge and understanding. And if you agree with that, say "I do." Okay, thank you. So the first order of business today is the disposition of the February 5th minutes. Everybody here at the commission has received those. I do have one correction that needs to be made, and it's at the bottom of the third page during a discussion about tiny houses, and the document says Ream Street, and it's actually Ring Street, R-I-N-G. So, okay. Does anybody else have any questions, concerns, or comments about the minutes? Hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve the minutes. Is there a motion?
I move.
Moved by Mr. Stone, as seconded by Mr. Phillips. Okay, so any other comments about it at all? Okay, so hearing none, then all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anybody opposed? No. Okay, so it's passed. We have no cases today. The first item the item on the agenda is a communication, and it's a discussion with American Structure Points, and in particular, I believe they want to speak about the public meeting that was yesterday, and if there's any comments or concerns or questions or things we would like to present them, we'll have that opportunity. So, okay.
So my name is David Baird. I'm a senior project manager with American Structure Point, and I'll let the others on our team introduce themselves.
Matthew Rourke, Planning and Economic Development.
Okay.
I'm Martin Spink. I'm an associate planner with American Structure.
So are we, let's see, are you able to see?
We're able to see it here.
Okay,
okay, there they are.
Good. Yes, so we kind of went through the introduction. So last night, as many of you may know, we hosted a public input session, and so I'm going to get to kind of what we heard a little bit after that. But I first want to kind of start off with, because we've had a lot of questions as to kind of what is an overlay zone. So really what an overlay zone is for those people who are new to zoning, you have different pieces of property, and they're classified as residential or commercial. So that's kind of like your base zoning district. But an overlay district can look at a certain area that maybe has a certain character and can either add or reduce requirements from that. So the city currently has a couple already. There's the Uptown Historic District and then the Wellness Wellhead Protection Area. So those are it's not a new concept, but really what we heard through the Stimson Avenue Corridor Plan, kind of the inspiration for this was taken that there's really a desire to make some of these areas not only more walkable, but also to make and ensure that businesses are thriving there. So what are ways that in the city code are things that could be incentivized or modified or changed potentially that would add to that characteristic. One point I made last night, and I'll make again, is that the city does have a history of having some planning documents, and there have been amendments over the years. And we see this a lot of times is what we hear that the city wants, and then we look at the code and we realize that maybe the two don't match up exactly. So that's kind of the impetus and the thought process on this. And I will say for the Planning Commission members, if you have any questions, please feel free to jump in as I speak. I'd love for this to be an interactive thing, and if not, we can take questions afterwards as well. So I did mention the Stimson Avenue corridor plan. One question we've got is kind of, or we've received is how is this related to the Stimson Avenue corridor plan, and how is it different? So the first thing I want to mention is that the Stimson Avenue corridor plan, as many people may know, was a federally funded project, and to get that, it was through what we call an opportunity zone. So there were only certain areas of the city where this could be looked at, and that was one of the areas. But what we heard and what the city heard is really a desire to enhance the appearance, the multimodal ability, floodplain concerns, land use. A number of different things came out of that, which could apply not only to Stimson Avenue, but other areas as well. It really, the last bullet point I said, it prompted the city to consider small scale commercial corridors and how it might benefit everywhere. So we have, in looking back at the Stimson Avenue corridor, that is something that is, it informs this process, but a plan is different than a code amendment. In that a plan kind of gives you a framework of what you're looking to do. Eventually, if a code amendment were to come, and it would come to the Planning Commission eventually after a series of meetings, there would be some actual changes to the code. So I want to make it clear that we have not started making a draft of this. It was important for us to come and hear the comments that we had from citizens and from business stakeholders. And I'll say we learned a lot. There's a lot of things that we heard that maybe we wouldn't have thought that we would have heard before we came. And that's not unique to the city of Athens. We always learn a lot from these engagement activities. So I do want to kind of just give some people, they like to see pictures instead of kind of bullet points. And so this is something on the right is from the actual Stimson Avenue corridor. And then on the left is a photo of not in Athens, but in another location that has created this kind of a vibe and commercial activity. One thing you notice there is on the left, there's a sign there that points for pedestrians. It doesn't point for automobiles. So that's kind of the thought process on some of these things. What we see, and it's not unique to the city of Athens, but a lot of these codes were developed in an area where people were thinking more just about the automobile. And some of these areas we're looking at, well, maybe there's an increase in pedestrian traffic, and if that's the case, then maybe we need to plan for it a little bit differently, and maybe the code needs to reflect that. So as far as the input we've had thus far, we've had the sessions we had yesterday with community leaders, business owners, city staff, and I would suspect one of the questions we got at the public open house was who specifically did you meet with, the business owners? So I'm going to turn it over to Megan to kind of give you a rundown of that. And before I do want to make mention that these people were not selected by the city. It was an open, I know that some people may have found the ad that said that invited it, and others may not have, but it was not the city saying we're selecting these 8 people to talk about. They signed up themselves.
So we had first sessions yesterday. First, we met with Christine Hughes of Village Bakery. Then we met with Leslie Schaller of Casa and AceNet. Then we got to talk with Art Ostrike of Jackie O's and Kate Stotts with Procos. And then we met with Ben Ziff with HapCap. And our last session in person was with Councilmember Alan Swank. We do have 2 other businesses that were unable to meet yesterday in person, so we'll be scheduling virtual sessions with them. Those 2 businesses or people are Peter Kotsis with Athens Bike, and then also Sarah Koya with Cool Digs.
I'll say we also have a community survey that's out. We did get some requests to kind of clarify some of the questions. So we're not going to change any of the questions, but we'll provide resources for people to understand a little bit more. There were a few questions that referenced the term overlay district, and we had people who wanted more information about what that meant, and that's kind of one of the reasons we're kind of presenting that first slide. So we want to give some references to that, but that will be ongoing. So just kind of a few things that we took away from the sessions, and I really want to highlight that word initial because we heard a lot, and I'll say that obviously the stakeholder sessions were more of a one-on-one thing, but the public meeting, we had a really good turnout. And so obviously when you have a really good turnout, you get lots of comments and lots of things to think through. So this presentation today was never intended to be like, you know, it was more to engage you guys while we're here and kind of think of the Planning Commission as a stakeholder, if you will. But we also kind of wanted to preliminarily say this is kind of what, you know, what we heard. And we always ask Planning Commissions, is this what you're hearing in the community? And if it's not, if you're not hearing what we heard, then, you know, please tell us that. So with that kind of background, I want to say, of course, we met with the individual business owners. I kind of went through that a little bit, but there were a substantial number of concerns about local businesses and recent local business closure. We had a lot of people that mentioned that. And so the bullet points, just to clarify, are things that we didn't just hear from one person. It was kind of we heard, it was like a theme, is a good way to put it. So there was a lot of discussion about, you know, what could be done with that moving forward. And one of the things I will say is that, you know, redevelopment is really becoming a real tool for local businesses. I had some people that you know, legally, there's no way for the city, and I know this has been discussed before, to just ban chain restaurants. I mean, that's something that legally the city can't do. But what I will say is that redevelopment really can take a hold for local businesses, because a lot of these older buildings, they don't fit like a chain's what we call pro forma. They have it in their mind, I want this large of a building, I want this much parking. It doesn't really fit exactly. So when we do these similar projects across Ohio, Indiana, and in some cases the country, we see a lot of local businesses with redevelopment. So that's one of the things we're trying to look at is, you know, are there things in the codes that are prohibiting this? One of the things that we did hear a lot was that from these local business owners was a concern that the parking requirements were making it difficult for a business to locate. And so that's one of the great things about having these sessions. That's not something that was like first and foremost on my mind. I mean, it had been discussed, but it really came out loud and clear. So I don't have the answer to that today. And that is a balancing act, as I said last night. I mean, there may be people who live close there that feel like if the parking is reduced, then, you know, someone's going to park next to their house. I mean, there's a give and take there, but it is something that we're definitely going to look at in this process. Any comments or thoughts on those items?
Well, one of the things, I you know, the parking thing is kind of a double-edged sword in my mind. That's kind of what I'm getting at, yeah. You know, it's, you know, because, I mean, this community grew up before the automobile had a significant foothold, and yet now it's become more and more, you know, we're more and more dependent on it, really. And I think the community has done a good job, and HABCAP and others, trying to provide a multi-mogul type system, but it's going to be a challenge there. You know, for example, the restaurant there up at the end near the fire station has basically been kind of converted into primarily a drive-through. You know, and instead of a restaurant where you can sit down or drive through, you know, so they're basically, you know, reducing the number of staff they have maybe to manage the inside, and are just you know, just focusing more on trying to get people on driving through. So, you know, it's actually a magnet for something like that. So that's one, you know, it's an interesting, because it's a balancing act, and I don't know how you really address that well and try to make it more of a a pedestrian corridor or encourage more pedestrian movement throughout our community.
You know, the parking thing, we have two different clients right now, well, we have multiple different clients, but I have two right now that we've kind of asked this question out, and I've gotten one city that has said one thing, and one city has said, nope, we want our parking, and another city that has said, no, absolutely, we want to reduce your parking requirements substantially. So this is something where it takes a little bit of public engagement to know where we really stand, because there are things that are trends that we see at multiple cities, but that's one where a code change needs to be tailored to Athens and what we're hearing from the public, because it is not from the public here, because it is not a one size fits all where people are going to be happy at the end of the day. So that's kind of what we try to go with the public engagement. I mean, there are things that that's a good example of where there's not really a right answer or a wrong answer. It's kind of a consensus of what the public wants moving forward.
Yes, go ahead.
Just a couple of comments. One, and I think that's an excellent historical perspective, that the town being created before, the automobile, and as we look at that, and I'm sure Mr. Delich has the correct percentages, but this is one of the most walkable cities in the state. It's one of the most walkable cities in the nation. And we've got two groups from the city, and I don't know if you've had the opportunity to meet them. Mr. Delich serves on one of them, and that's a pedestrian accessibility committee that's been studying and working with Service Safety Director Stone for years on what do we do about curb cuts and access. The second group is the Commission on Disabilities, and they have annual reports, and some of their information is available on our city website, so that might be revealing for you. I'm back to business opportunities, and I took a note of the people that you met with yesterday. I know Molly was there from the Economic Development Council last night, as I think Kristen was also from the chamber. But certainly, if they haven't made comments, that would be, I think, really helpful to solicit from them, because they have a flavor of different groups. We have an Uptown Business Association, but there are a lot of other businesses that are represented. And I just make an aside, I'm not meaning to minimize the number of businesses that we've lost, and I know the importance of our local businesses, but I think the mayor cited the other day that we do have a gain of 21 new businesses starting in the community.
Well, that's great.
So that's something to, are there groups that we can be looking at there amongst those 21 new members? The one other question has to do with, if I'm understanding right, you're working with the city in one of two ways. One is this overlay zone, and I understand it's a process, so we're not, looking at results from last night necessarily immediately. But is the other one that you're doing a general review of some of our code? And so I think what would be helpful, not necessarily today, but just a sense of a timeline on where these two tracks are going.
Sure.
And what we can be looking
I do have a few
at.
slides about the code audit that
Great.
I wanted to, after I got through this, that I'll talk about.
Okay.
So yeah, no, I appreciate those comments. Anything else, or?
I do have a question. I guess is some of the tension you're hearing from stakeholders and as well as the public, particularly business owners, when we talk about corridors and business corridors, are current off-street parking requirements that are in our code that potentially could be removed or shrunk in order to support really what I think we're thinking about: smaller lots fronting on a parcel along an arterial that maybe isn't an arterial like the 5-lane portion of East State Street, maybe our other portions. Is that really what you're hearing?
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
You kind of hit that nail on the head.
And is it, hey, we don't want those parking requirements, or hey, you have to keep those parking requirements, or is it both?
Well, from the business standpoint, the businesses were that we met with, again, we met with, really felt like that was the way the city should move. I bring that forward because I want to hear what residents and neighbors think, because the pushback on that is a lot of times we'll have residents of neighboring communities. A lot of these corridors, there's neighborhoods right next to it, and they may feel like there's concern about their parking space, or that someone's going to park down the street, and that's a concern for them. It's interesting. There are a lot of communities that I've worked in where that is not a concern at all. The residents that live there actually like it in a weird kind of way because it's an eclectic kind of thing. But then there are other communities where it is not. They really do not appreciate that. I just would say so. I don't have a good feeling. I left kind of feeling from the business community that would be a positive thing, but we got some comments last night about that there's some students that don't have a car, and that's great for them. They can walk, and that's maybe the parking requirements are a little too large because you have these large number of people who can walk. I mean, we heard that as a really good comment. So, that's kind of where this continual process is. And what I really didn't hear a lot of is the people who lived right next to these corridors, what their feelings were about the reduction in parking requirements. So moving forward, that would be something we would like to hear, because the response we hear from community to community is very different on that issue.
Mm-hmm.
So it sounds like you've got, you talk about different communities have different, they different strategies or different thoughts about things. Have you, as a part of that group of communities you've worked with,
Mm-hmm.
have there been a number of communities with universities?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you've seen that same kind of division? Some feel
Absolutely.
like... Okay.
So I will say myself and Matthew O'Rourke, before we worked at American Structure Point, we worked at another firm together. So we've got a history of doing these projects together. We worked in Manhattan, Kansas on a very similar project. And that's the first community that comes to my mind from my experience, because that tension was very much there. And so I can see some, for those who don't know, Manhattan, Kansas is where Kansas State University is. So, a lot of these, it is not uncommon in university communities that the university has grown over time. They have bought some buildings, and kind of that footwork expands a little bit. And there's we see a lot of conflict, if you will, or differing views when neighborhoods start to have a lot of college housing. And we've heard that already, a concern about that. So I'll turn it over. I'll ask Matt if he has any thoughts on that, because you've also done college communities as well. But that's the main thing that comes to my mind.
Sure. Worked with in Manhattan, Kansas, and the county next door, because it spilled over to impact them based on geography. And even right now, we're working on a much different scale. Greencastle, Indiana, where DePaul University is, and it's right in their downtown. Abuts it, just very similar here. It's another combination kind of plan code project that our team's working on, and we're seeing the same issues. The commuters need places to park. They don't necessarily have the surface lot kind of renting that's going on here in Athens that students will rent for the day. So, but they just don't have parking, and so they end up parking around the town square where the courthouse is, and not being able to be there during classes if they don't live on site. There's very similar issues. We hear it a lot, to the point there where they've actually taken a step back and say, do we want to allow residential units above our main street businesses, because they're becoming rentals, and they're trying to encourage more employer base. Very similar things that we've heard just in the initial stages of this process, and then even back in 23 when we're working on the Stimson Avenue plan. And so, yeah, these I think the solutions are always different. DePaul University is a much smaller university. They're looking at doing some mixed use developments based on some grants that are going on in Indiana to help fund those, to provide parking and apartments and or condos for professors. That's their biggest problem. They can't get professors to move there, and they're having recruiting issues. So,
Yep.
I
Same issue
mentioned
here.
that because I think that's a fairly universal one these days. And they have the added pressure of being really only 45 minutes outside the Indianapolis metro area, and so they can't get people to move there because they can commute too easily. They're right off an interstate. So lot of those kind of dynamics we're working with. And one thing, as I was sitting here thinking, and I was thinking about last night, I had a lot of conversations last night about walkability, and I kind of want to clarify in this context, we're thinking about how do we create a regulatory environment to encourage private property owners to sort of be part of that. What we said, having the setbacks close to the street, making it maybe lot coverage more expansive so you can cover more of your lot, reducing parking standards. Especially on Stimson Avenue, we made sure, since there was so much investment in the public side of that already, wider sidewalks, kind of that infrastructure piece is already taken care of in some neighborhoods. We're really trying to take the next step and kind of figure out how do we encourage private investors to be a part of that environment. So I just kind of want to clarify that, because I think maybe after I digested our conversations last night, there might be some confusion that like we're proposing a bunch of new sidewalk improvements and those things too, which really that would be part of the private development if it came along. And we could talk about regulations that encourage that. Certainly you have to meet ADA requirements and those things, but we're kind of talking outside the right of way, not inside the right of way for sure. And so I think that's an important distinction to make as part of this process.
One thing I think too is, as the highway has developed and was developed in this community, Stimson Avenue, used to come in Columbus Road and into town, and now there are other ways in because of the highway development. And Stimson, I think, is a pretty important one, and and I might have been talking with you last night about the idea that first impressions are pretty important, and as you come into a community, and whatever we can do to try to encourage the image of the community to be expressed in that corridor, I think, is a pretty important.
Yeah, I 100% agree with everything. We talked a lot about that internally when we were working on the plan and then on this process. And a lot of what was in that plan was encouraging property owners to come up with unique ways to make that gateway more welcoming and make it a more welcoming environment to hang out in, so to speak. Maybe putting little parklets in front of your businesses if you have a leftover area where you could put some game tables and things that are weathering, things we've seen in other communities. I mean, that's a lot of what we're talking about, is creating the regulatory environment to allow all those things.
Right. Well, I like the idea of bringing the buildings forward and not having, you look at a number of the properties there, there's a lot of asphalt and parking in front of the buildings. And, again, the whole part, it's a balance of what you do there. But, and I also think that, we are a community that is short on housing too. And, and I would hate to see, we develop another student corridor there. I'd like to see it more like for young professionals and, some housing there, and maybe a more similar to like downtown Athens, but only the uses are different, business maybe below and above, more condominiums or more upscale apartments that they're targeted for somebody, for the young professionals that are in this community, I guess.
Yep. I think we heard that yesterday,
Yeah,
and we definitely heard that in 23 working on the other plan. And I mean, part of what we heard during that process too is making sure we preserve the commercial corridor as a commercial corridor and not losing the retail space there too by just residential development. So part of what we're thinking about is this: do we make sure first floor is required to have retail or business or something in it, and then you can only have upper story residential units, and the price points and things we can figure out. Well, you can't really dictate price point in a code per se, but we can create ways to incentivize that. But so that's another important part of this, is we don't want that neighborhood to lose its commercial connectivity too, because there are a lot of residents that live just north of there. So those are all the types of things we're hoping to hear more of as we really dig into this process.
Yeah, I think the other kind of takeaway is that, this isn't unique to just Athens, but I think a lot of communities always ask me what's the difference between a plan and a code project. A plan, I kind of alluded to this earlier, but I just kind of throw it out there. A plan is more general in nature, and in a code project, you have to get kind of into the weeds of exactly how these things are going to be written. So I say that because I think from some of the comments I heard was a little bit of confusion as to the differences between those items. So I'm going to scroll over. We did have. I want to make sure that I'm hitting all of the key points that we heard. I will say there's a real desire in this project for the community to be heard. We tried to make sure that they understood this was an upfront engagement. We had a lot of people who were kind of inquiring, is there a draft yet, or what is it? And I said this last night. We have not started drafting. That was a point of having some initial public feedback at this meeting, and then from that, we're going to kind of download everything that we heard. As I said, keyword on this is initial. We've got, as I said, we had a lot more people come to the meeting, so we've got a lot more that we need to look at and think through before our next step. I think there was definitely some differing views on how to move forward, but I do want to point out that there was a real genuine desire for redevelopment of some of these locations, and so I always kind of try to lead with, what do you have in common, and I definitely think that's what I heard in common is a desire within the community to really engage and look at this. So that was definitely heard from the number of people who came. I'll say it's for for a similar project that is not a whole citywide project, and there were some people who did kind of give us some very broad statements that would be more along the lines of like a citywide comprehensive plan, which I think is something Megan has talked with you or thought about moving forward. So that's another takeaway, is that some people kind of maybe thought or wanted it to be more of a citywide discussion. But I definitely felt a real desire from the public to be engaged and to also really look at this and see what can be done as far as redevelopment. Any other questions on that? Okay, I brought a slide there for make sure we did have comments and questions. So anything else from you guys on that one?
I don't think so.
And if you have something in the future, again, this isn't the last time that we'll be here. Preliminarily, we were talking about being back in a couple months. But I do want to, you brought up the code audit, and so I'm going to talk about that briefly, and then we'll kind of circle around because there are two real key portions of this overall project that we have. And so what a code audit is just really, I like to call it's like a technical review of all of the locations, in your case, the titles, chapters, and sections of the city code that deal with land use and land development regulations. And so the first thing kind of out of the box that we noticed, the biggest one I'll start with that we always review in this process, and we've done this with other cities, is the zoning code, because that has to be the most tailored to a community. It has to be right-sized. But I will say, and just in general, I'm going to hit to the next slide and I'll come back. So there are, and I'd have to count it up to see exactly how many sections and titles, but usually when we show this slide, it's just about 3 or 4 items. It is not this many titles, this many chapters. What that tells me is that there is a lot of, this is a difficult code to navigate. Much more difficult than a lot of cities, and it's already kind of a legalistic term that a lot of people aren't used to. But with this many sections, what I suspect when we kind of delve into the details and discussing with Megan and the code department, I already know this to be the case, is that there are definitely a lot of provisions that can be interpreted multiple different ways. And so what we see with cities similar to Athens, and initially I've kind of already heard this, is, as staff changes, maybe one person reads something slightly different than another person, and that's only natural. But some of the feedback we've received thus far from citizens is that there is a concern that of that history of, well, one person said this, one person said that. What I try to say is my response to them is that when you have a code that has so many different sections and titles, and is open for interpretation, that it's only natural that you have more of those issues. And so one of the things that we have done in the past, and it is kind of outside of the scope of just this project, but it is going in and consolidating all of these codes and making them easier to read, easier to use. We put tables and graphics. We make it much more user-friendly, because right now this is I'm not going to say, I have had communities where it was in a format that was even more challenging, but I will say this is a very difficult, with the way the sections and the way things read, it is very difficult. So I think that sometimes a lot of the frustration that we hear, it gets personalized, but in reality, it is just a difficult code that can be interpreted two different ways. And having worked in positions similar to your code department, Megan, and your city planner, I have found that there's a connection to where the heavy disputes are and with codes that are ambiguous. And I don't think the average person really kind of thinks about it that way. So that's one kind of initial observation that I wanted to throw out there, because it is, again, it's not the worst code that I've seen with that kind of thing, but it's got a lot of potential issues, and this is a code that can be made much more user-friendly without even changing what some of the standards are. Now, I have concerns when we get into the meat of it that there'll be something in maybe the zoning code that differs from the landscaping regulations, and that's a good example. Most cities don't have their own title that says landscaping regulations. It doesn't say shade tree commission. It's all wrapped in with a zoning code or a unified development code. So what that does is over time, as there are amendments in particular to a code, there may be one section of the code that gets changed and someone's not even aware that there's another section of the code that stays, right? And then it's still on the books 10 years later and someone's looking at it, and it's hard for them to interpret which one's which. So, I've already heard that feedback from city planners, or from your city planner and from the code department. Now, I want to go back to your comment about timeline on this. A lot of times when we do this, we do have a flow chart that says, here's the timeline. I don't have an explicit one, particularly when it comes to the code audit, and that's the main reason is because the code director, David Riggs, just had surgery, and he has told us that he wants to review this very thoroughly because he's very engaged in this, but I think there's some, he wants to have time to thoroughly review it, and so I think somewhat on a timeline, we're kind of waiting to see how well he does with his recovery from surgery. And it only makes sense to make sure that he has had a thorough time, because he's the one on the ground seeing this on a day-to-day basis. So I don't know if you guys want to, if there's anything else you want to add about that, but that is a factor that we have to consider in this that maybe in other projects, we wouldn't have. Yeah.
A question, if we have time for you all to also be able to consult with the law director's office,
Sure.
and the clerk of council who used to serve in the law director's office, and Director Stone probably has a better understanding of this than I ever do. But part of the reason that those commissions are spelled out, I think, there are certain protocols that they're following, and I would want to make sure that as we look at it and review it, we're going, oh, well, it interfaced with that system, but it doesn't anymore now that we've merged it. So
Yeah.
a conversation with those two key offices, I think, and of course with Director Stone would help share some information with you that will
we
help guide that.
highly encourage that. Again, it's kind of on the front end, but yeah, if we were to go forward with actually, doing any rewriting of this, absolutely, we would do that. Absolutely. So, any other questions on that? Now, I will say we have, or I also want to say that we've created what we call an annotated outline, which is, this is how we would propose to reorganize it. And we've started on what we call kind of a land use adjustment table. I'll explain that here in a second, but these are things that David has seen, and he wants. It was time-wise unfortunate that his surgery was when it was, but he really wants to go through this. He's very supportive of the concept of what we're doing, but he wants to make sure there's, as I understand it, there's some things that on interpretation that he wants to make sure is included in this. But I do want to give an example of where your current code, it could be what we call kind of streamlined to help out. There are terms such as like flower shop, shoe store, gift shop. Those all kind of function the same way. They're all really like a retail sales. And so, if something functions the same way, and you have two different terms for it, and potentially even one is permitted in one district and not in another district, it becomes very difficult for staff to interpret. For example, the one I like to use is, well, if a shop sells flowers and it does gifts, which one do you classify it as? So those are the kind of things that we look at as we go through this. It's by far, and we don't have a complete draft of it yet, but we're looking for things to remove and recommend. We're giving you recommendations for things that can be removed to remove this confusion and misinterpretation in the code, which at the end of the day, our experience tells us will make for a less combative process because it's going to reduce the ambiguity in the code. Any questions on that, or any other points you guys want to make on that? Okay. So next steps, obviously I said reviewing the public engagement. We are going to keep up the survey. We're going to kind of qualify a few things, give some resources to people so that they, because there were again comments about I want to be more engaged, or I want to more understand what you're asking more before I fill it out. I guess is a good way to put it. And of course, we had the open house and the stakeholders. We will start thinking through the drafting of this, but we will not do that until we've gone through all of the comments that we heard. And a timeline on the code audit. Let me ask, because I know it's a kind of an open question, but what's the latest on David's recovery timeline? Okay. Yeah.
I mean, I think he'll be back within a few days. I mean, he had.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. I thought it might be a little bit longer than a couple days.
No, that's okay.
Oh, okay. I know he's been out for a few weeks, I think now, but well, as far as a more definitive timeline on this whole process, I think if David's going to be back in a couple weeks, I think we're going to have our next. We've been doing some staff calls, like virtual, what we call check-in calls with Megan. David's been involved in that too. Obviously, with the health situation, he hasn't been on the last few. I think we need to consult with him, and then we can kind of flesh out more of an organized timeline, because we've definitely heard that. But I think it would be, I would not want to announce something and then have David give us some different feedback on his thoughts. So I know there is a desire, and probably some people who would love for me to give a chart and say we're going to be back here 2 weeks, but I think it would be premature before we digest what we heard and make sure that David is fully engaged and back at work. So.
I do have a question on the zoning, particular as you delve into the code audit. Our code, and there's a little bit of editorial commentary, but it's a function of somebody identified a problem over the years or a perceived problem. They said, I'm going to write a law for that, and then they added a law. right? And so we added a title, and then it continued, right? And you could look, and you could count up, and you could probably look at the era, right? Like, I mean, there's one in there about fracking, and when fracking was a big deal, we wrote a title on that, and we didn't fit it somewhere else into the code. So, you know, that's a function of how we got to where we are, but being able to pull it all into, you know, some sort of comprehensive cross-reference thing, I think is super important. On zoning in particular, one of the challenges that we have, talk about upzoning or downzoning, and trying just to understand uses in a particular zone and being able to look at a glance. So if I'm a business owner or I'm a landowner, at a glance I can go, okay, I'm in an R1 zone. What can I have here and what can I not? Can you give an example of what you've seen in other communities on how code was organized that was easier to see that than what we have?
Absolutely, and that's something that we could even kind of do as a example for you, and that's what we call as a land use matrix. So as someone who, and I don't want to be a repeat record, but I did work in previous positions to your staff, and I know what it's like to have someone call and say, and their only question is, can I do X in this zoning district? That is the first question you get. And with with a code that it can be misinterpreted, it is frustrating for them to hear, well, give me a few minutes, I need to kind of delve into this. A land use matrix states right up front, this is permitted in this zoning district, this is permitted with additional standards, and it's in a table format. So the other thing on your code, and I mentioned it, but I want to highlight it based on your question, is there are a lot of things that can be put in tables, and right now it is very text heavy. And so when you have a table, it is very easy for that owner may be able to just get online and see the table and say, oh, yeah, okay, well, I am permitted to do this in this zoning district. So what we also find is that staff, when you put it in that format, it really frees up staff time to be able to do other things, because number one, when someone calls, the staff is able to give a quicker answer. And number two, it reduces calls because more people are able to get on and interpret it for themselves. I mean, you know, if it's difficult for staff to interpret, imagine what the average citizen is thinking. So when you put it in these more user-friendly ways that have a lot of cities have gone to, the benefits are numerous, and they're multiple benefits from it. Great. So I will say that next time we're here, we will definitely be able to show an example of a land use matrix. I know it's a little bit, that's something that's best shown with an example. But you know, those are the kind of things that we want to formalize as far as the code audit, getting David's review. And that's when next time we're here, we can give you, you know, more of a firm understanding of some of our key recommendations from this code audit. Thank you. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight on that next step slide. Those are strictly just the next steps. I wanted to make sure people knew there would be more steps.
Yeah.
Yeah, other than the ones we highlighted. I mean, there will be more engagement. We'll be talking to the community once we have some ideas, at least semi-formulated, to get their feedback. It's not just we do these next steps and we're back and asking for adoption. I just
That's a very important.
Yeah, I want to make sure we highlighted that those are just the next things we're working on, not the only things.
Good point. Yeah, we definitely had a number of comments that, you know, people would like to have another similar session from last night, and we can definitely incorporate that as far as the timing and the exact you know, dates. Again, I don't want to be a broken record, but I definitely want David Riggs' input before we move forward on that.
Well, so thank you very much. I don't know if there's anybody in the community or in the audience that would like to make some comments that would be, you know, some additional input for these individuals, or some comments on something they've said. You're welcome to come to the podium. State your name and your address, if you would, please. And in the case, you know, so one of the things I will say also is that our meetings now start at 11:30. We changed that a while ago. And so I did basically ask the people who wanted to speak to raise their right hand. And I'll do that again. So I just ask that, and want you to confirm that all that you're going to present here today is to the truth to the best of your knowledge.
I do.
Thank you.
Feel like being in court. I have to set my clock up till 11:30. Nice to see David and his crew again. I got to spend, oh, by the way, Alan Swank, 40 Townsend Place, Athens City Council, 4th Ward, and I am coming in that capacity. Got to spend well more than my allotted half hour with David and his crew yesterday, and unfortunately, I think I cut into their dinner time. I don't know if you got to that restaurant or if you had to go through the Sonic drive-through.
Well, we did go through a drive-through. Martin was nice enough to go pick up some stuff, and we did get a chance to grab some before dinner. But so just barely, but we did.
Well, if I heard you correctly, you'll be back in Athens. So hopefully, we can allot some more time to get one of our fine restaurants here in town.
Yeah, absolutely. We definitely had to go through a drive-through.
Yeah. I said I'm here as a city council person, but this morning at 6:34, I received an email from a resident of Athens, former council member and Stimson Avenue business owner, Peter Katzis. And he has gone back into the workforce, and unfortunately from 11:30 to 12:30, he's tied up every day, was not able to come. So he asked me to read this brief statement into the record. So if you'll indulge me. Councilmember Swank, please convey the following message to the Planning Commission pertaining to the Neighborhood Corridor Overlay Zone planning process. And I will say, much of what he says in here, you addressed in your second bullet point on the first slide, so appreciate that. But again, I will read this on Mr. Katz's behalf. I was made aware of 30-minute meetings being scheduled on 218 between 1 and 4 p.m. for Athens local businesses pertaining to the Neighborhood Corridor Overlay Zone. I contacted our city planner, Ms. Jennings, on 2-3 to schedule a meeting outside of that window and was assured that a time would be scheduled for me. As I send this email at 6:30 a.m. on 2/19, there has been no meeting set to accommodate my request. This would be fine if any of my thoughts or comments were present prior to any presentation by the consultants, but this currently does not seem to be the case. In the forwarded communication attached to this email, I had many questions about the process, the overall goal, and what tools are being considered to encourage the goal. I received no detailed response to any of my queries. I cannot comment if I approve or disapprove of what is being proposed due to not having ample information to understand concepts or processes. I would like to believe that I'm a valued community member based on my track record. I also have a lifetime experience developing a small business in our market. I spent 6 days a week for 20 plus years in a city business corridor learning how a successful small seasonal business works in this unique market. Additionally, I've been a proponent of active transportation in the community for many years. One would think that my interest to participate would be welcomed. I'd also like to mention that every member of a community should feel valued. If I'm receiving special treatment in this process, so be it. That would be better than every citizen feeling this way about the planning process. I hope the latter isn't the case. The open house on 218 presented more questions than answers, as it seems we are at the concept stage and no concrete ideas or concepts were put forth. Asking the planners what has happened in other projects, it was stated it's different depending on the community. It wasn't clearly stated what the steps are moving forward, but it does seem that this was the only public engagement slated for this project. A more defined process and timeline would have been appreciated. I would like to see a presentation of the public in an open house style to view the concepts once they're proposed. Maybe the city will have to bring forth such a presentation if this is not allowed in the planning contract. I may be in full support of what the administration is trying to accomplish. I'm in full support of a thorough and transparent planning process, and have not seen enough good faith offered by the administration in this category. To date, I've offered public comment after a preliminary plan was completed. The mayor stated on record that I and others would be included in the future process. To date, I received no invitation to participate, and my request to participate has not been fulfilled. I do not like to express my dismay about any process. Hopefully, you're able to understand why I feel dismayed about this one. I remain skeptical on the results of this project until shown how we arrived at the proposal. My time on the street is drawing to a close, so I don't expect these decisions to impact me and my dealings in the business corridor. I do hope that the next generation of business owners have the ability to make business work in the community and are not hampered by any decision that is ultimately decided by City Council. Thank you, Peter Katzis. I think David has done a wonderful job addressing much of this, and I will certainly encourage Mr. Katzis to view what you folks have presented today and everything that Structure Point has brought forward. I think a good deal of that is addressed here. But as you said, you were a bit surprised by the turnout. Fortunately, the fire chief did not invoke the fire code capacity, 49. I think I counted 75 there, but it does show the interest of this community. And I'm really grateful that you folks recognize that and are willing to take all that into account.
Absolutely. And, that's a comment. I appreciate your comments on that. And just kind of as a follow-up, I think a lot of it, it is addressed and we will address moving forward, I think is kind of the answer to it. So, just to kind of reiterate, that a lot of times when we do this style project in a community, we don't get near the turnout that we got. So, we gotta want to take that into account and really see what the results were from it. So, and I think Megan's got something I want to say. That's all I kind of wanted to add.
I just wanted to be able to address some of the items that Mr. Kotsis brought up in his email. He did reach out to me at the beginning. Actually, I emailed him directly when we were launching these stakeholder sessions because I knew that he was interested, and he said that he would not be available on the 18th during the day because of his schedule conflict, and so that's when I offered a virtual stakeholder session. I informed him that we would have to work with American Structure Point to coordinate our schedules, and we just haven't been able to do that yet. We do have another business interested in a virtual stakeholder session, so we will be scheduling those still, and they will still be going in as public input into the overlay zone considerations. Mr. Kotsis also has emailed me a couple different times asking questions, and I have always responded to him in detail to the best of my ability. And I just wanted to reiterate that I did reach out to him directly about scheduling the virtual stakeholder session, and that we will be still scheduling that virtual stakeholder session.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Stone.
Mr. Chairman, and which camera am I is looking at me? Is that that one? That one. So as the senior appointed official in the mayor's administration, I take great umbrage at the statement by Mr. Kotsis, and I'm looking at him right now because hopefully he's watching this, that the administration has not acted in good faith. So this administration is extremely close to the people. And every time since Mr. Kotsis has left city council, when he shows up at a public meeting, he just wants to be angry. He can call me anytime, he can call Megan anytime, he can call the mayor anytime, and he can share what he wants as part of this process, because he's not yet said what he wants as part of this process. So I believe that the planners from American Structure Point are being probably as transparent as they can possibly be. But if the goal is just to be angry and to send angry emails and to come to meetings and be angry, you can do that, but you're not part of the process. So that's my response to that letter from Mr. Kotsis. Give me a call, Pete. We'll talk about it. Thank you.
I'm Rob Delich, live on 124 Morris Avenue here in the city, chair of the Board of Zoning Appeals for the city, on the Pedestrian Bicycle Task Force, numerous other things I'm involved with in the city, especially about active transportation and such. But I don't want to say a whole lot here, but one thing I've seen firsthand is that the B3 zoning, and this is really talking about the overlay part of this discussion, B3 zoning has failed us. We mentioned a couple examples here already today. One is the Sonic building, and in the redevelopment of it, we had an opportunity for that to be done differently, and it didn't end up happening. And part of the failure was the Board of Zoning Appeals, and I was not there that day, say. But another example is, I think the most recent redevelopment other than that on Stimson was the good office building, small office building that the Visitors Bureau is about to move into. That could have been done so well, and it was almost great, but it's not facing the street. There's no front entrance, there's no front facade, it's a brick wall to the street. And that would not have happened if we had this overlay in place, and it could have made that a better development that really fit the community better and fit our needs better. The neighborhood, 900 homes, is right there behind where that building is. So many thousands of people can walk there, let alone the student side. So there's a lot of opportunities for walking in that corridor and other corridors in the city too. But Stimson is the one most on my mind. I live a block off of Stimson myself. So at any rate, that's what I wanted to say, that I think B3 zoning has failed us and we need to relook at this, and we're going in the right direction here, and I really want to encourage that.
And I'll say we will take, I really appreciate comments. I think I very much, obviously, as the chair of the Board of Zoning Appeals, he's very, very involved. But I very much appreciate very targeted comments, such as like, really, because that really helps us say, okay, let's, what I take away from a comment like that is we need to take a look at the B3 zoning as part of the code audit. So very targeted responses like that are excellent, so we can take a look at that. So we encourage that kind of feedback. So that was great information. Thank you.
Are there any other comments? Well, then with that, I thank Megan and I thank the American Structures Points for the presentation, and encourage you all to do good work, and we look forward to seeing you in the future. So the next item on the agenda is reports, and do we have any reports from the code office or from the planner's office?
The code office doesn't have any new reports.
Oh, thank you.
Neither does the planning office.
Okay.
I do have one item.
You have?
Yeah, I don't know. If you
Okay,
want to do it
on announcements now?
other
Announcement,
business?
other business.
Okay.
Okay.
Or do you want to do opportunities first, or do you want to do
No.
this first?
We can do this.
Okay.
now.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So what you have in front of you, unfortunately, I don't think we have a visual that we can put up on the screen, but folks can look certainly online if they want to. And what the image is an image of the zoning in the vicinity of the 2nd Street, Columbus Road, and Lancaster Street intersection. And the reason that I wanted the Planning Commission to just take a look at this and start thinking about it is the city is going to have to come up with what it's going to do with the former fire station headquarters. What has happened so far is we've had a prospective business approach the city and want to lease the space for a woodworking shop. And the way that would have to happen is that the city would have to transfer ownership of the former fire station headquarters to the Athens Community Improvements Corporation, and then the Community Improvements Corporation would subsequently lease to that business in order to put that woodworking shop in. However, we don't believe that the current zoning would support that use. The current zoning is R3. As you can see, that kind of brown image there in the middle of the screen is the portion that shows that. So, that's what caused me to take a look at this in the first place, to bring it to Planning Commission. But then I thought, wait a minute, there's a few things going on in the vicinity, that part of the city where current use isn't supported by current zoning. And I thought perhaps it would make sense for us to look at the wider area. And I would call your attention to the Ohio Valley Children's Museum, or the Museum of Discovery. It is also zoned R3, and I don't know that that's an appropriate use for that. That was a church. It's flipped from a church to the museum at the time, and then you can see the former Highway Patrol headquarters. And if you look at the map specifically, it's showing as an R1. That's an administrative building for the city. We currently use it to store court records, but it's showing as an R1. Additionally, you can look at the former Dairy Queen location. It's at the corner of Sunset and Columbus Road. That building right now is zoned B1. B1 does not permit a drive-through. Dairy Queen has been closed now for more than a year, so if there were ever a person to buy that property, or the current owners to want to reopen it in its current configuration as a new Dairy Queen, or perhaps a different kind of restaurant with a drive-through, it would not be permitted. Now, that's possible that we don't want that to be the case, in which case the drive-through would go away permanently, but under the current zoning, it would not be allowed to be permitted if someone were to reopen it. So it may create conditions such that building sits vacant for a very long time. If someone couldn't use it for that use again. Likewise, if you look at Lancaster Street specifically, the current offices for the public defender are zoned primarily R1, with just one end of the building zoned B1. And so that R1 use isn't really so that's not correctly zoned. And then likewise, the auto repair activity at the end of Lancaster Street and where Columbus Road terminates into 2nd Street right now is Zone B1. An auto repair facility is not allowed inside of B1. So, we've got quite a bit of places in this area where the zoning doesn't align with the current use. And so my thought would be that if we were going to put forward a recommendation to City Council for rezoning of the former fire station in order to accomplish the goals of repurposing that building, we probably ought to look at the wider area. And I wanted to just bring it to the commission to comment on or to start to think about.
Any comments?
I think this is good. We're looking at it ahead of time.
Right, I agree.
And so this would be great, a forward-looking approach.
Perfect, yeah. Good. Yeah, it will be good to get David back so he can help with the evaluation of how we should move forward with this as well. Sure. So, good. Thank you very much for that. Yes.
Are we on other matters?
Other business announcements and other businesses.
Not to get into a discussion of it today at all. But as I understand, Old Pomeroy Road, because you're looking forward and being proactive, makes me think of Old Pomeroy Road. So temporarily, if I understand right, the development proposal for that section was linked to a rezoning ordinance that has been tabled. And so that's my only question. Long-term, maybe we can talk about it sometime later. Maybe it's not even our business right now because it's back in the hands of City Council, who has tabled that, as I understand it. So it's like, well, it didn't address what we want to do with that area. And Megan, I remember you as planner saying, this is part of the plan and we need to be looking at it long-term, that area down there, because it is potentially a corridor that you all are looking at. It's a neighborhood overlay zone and how we want to go about that. So that's just my aside.
Right. Well, yeah, right. When we were looking at that, there was some question about whether the individual, was that the property where did the organization, the individual, have standing or
right.
not?
And we didn't get that answer.
And so we actually went ahead and approved forwarding it, basically that the Planning Commission wanted to do this regardless of whether, so it is possible that City Council could, in fact, continue on with the rezoning of that property. Anyway.
What is the process, I guess? City Council tabled it, so it doesn't come back to us at any time? Okay.
On the table.
So it's removed from the table.
I get some clarification for that. Is the chair
Sure.
of planning development and how this all transpired?
Swank, Fourth Ward City Council. On Friday last week, the applicant who came before you, Spire Development, withdrew their request or proposal for that area, which simply rendered it a moot point. Granted, it was a zoning change, but it was a zoning change with a specific entity coming before you for a specific purpose. At Monday night's meeting, or Tuesday night's meeting last night, council voted 5-1 to table it. And one of the reasons it was tabled is because you had talked about possibly rezoning that whole area. It could be taken off the table at any time, any regular scheduled meeting. But I think until we get some direction from the Planning Commission as to further plans so that we're not getting into spot zoning, it will probably remain on the table. I will say this, there was tremendous opposition to this project. The residents of your neighborhood collected 377 signatures going door to door, which they presented to council last night. So there are a lot of things I think need to be considered this, but for the time being, it is tabled and can be brought off through the normal council procedures to discuss at a future date.
Thank you, Mr. Swank. Yes.
Just for the purposes of the body, Mr. Chairman, some analysis of the petition that came forward last night, roughly 120 to 130 of those were from residents who don't live in the city. So just for public awareness.
Yeah, and many of those were collected from customers at Floor and More, people who do come into that community.
Yes. Ma'am? You need to come up. You need to state your name. And I believe you came in late, so I'd ask you to, when you get there, to raise your right hand. Okay. And
I'll tell the truth.
thank you.
I'm Rhonda Riley. I live at 15 Far Hills Drive. And I just wanted to say that not all the people that lived here in that community signed the petition or feel that way. I think that particular development was problematic. And I think that many of the people that live there, like myself, had a very hard time getting information about what was happening. We're really blindsided. So not everybody feels that having a little more density there. I mean, there are several of the houses on Pomeroy Road who have additional units, and I believe that's R1, not R2. So anyway, I just wanted to state that not everybody's opposed to that.
Thank you. Okay. So let's see, did that answer your question, what you were looking for?
I think
Both-
the ball's back in the planning commission's court.
Or,
responding.
well, yeah, and
direction to the
David was planning on
director
looking at that corridor a little bit more in terms of zoning, so maybe that's the ideal thing to wait until there's a more comprehensive look at that particular
Thanks.
area.
Rob
Yes.
Black, as chair of the Board of Zoning Appeals, the Board of Zoning Appeals recommended to the city that the city look at the zoning in that area because we've had multiple requests. So the Board of Zoning Appeals acted to initiate what we thought was going to be a reassessment of the zoning in that area, not just a spot change here. So,
Right.
yeah, needs to be done, I think.
Thank you. Okay, is there any other new business or other business or announcements? Anybody? Okay. Well, with that, our next meeting is March 5th here at 11:30. Thank you all very much. I'll seek a motion to adjourn. I'll move that we adjourn. Is there a second? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Aye.